Hi, I'm Noam Maital, and welcome to the GovAI Podcast. AI is the most powerful technology of our time, and government still figuring out how to navigate this new frontier. Join me as we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming public service, unlocking potential efficiencies, the risks that no one's talking about, and what happens when innovation moves faster than regulation. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by Rachel Stern, founder and CEO of GovTech Venture. Rachel's been in the trenches of GovTech for over a decade, helping startups work both with government, not around it. Everything from lobbying, strategy, venture investing, and now backing early stage companies focused on the GovTech, trying to modernize how public services run. She's also served on some boards, on the board of SIFStart, one of the go-to people in this ecosystem when you're thinking about building a company and a startup in the GovTech space. So Rachel, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have you for this conversation.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this discussion. AI is certainly top of for everyone.
Absolutely. And that's going to be probably a topic we'll talk about a bit as it relates to your venture. But before we jump, several steps in, let's take a step back. I'm curious, as someone who's founded a company and a second company in the GovTech space, I know how hard it is. When I sold my last company, the first thing I said is, I'm never doing another company in GovTech. So what pulled you into this sector and what's kept you there?
I think like many people in their early 20s, it was a little bit of time and place. I was really lucky to start my career at a time when states and cities were just starting to adopt the cloud. And there was this sort of unbelievable moment in time where historically their technology for government had been on-prem, very customized, enormously complicated systems that really needed a third party or a private sector overseer to make it work. And when cloud adoption came sort of down the food chain from the DoD and states and cities started to upload all of their documents and their data there, it opened up this moment in time where software as a service became possible, really for the first time. And so I was, again, very lucky time and place to be just starting my career when that was happening as these shifting tides of what governments expected from their technology and what constituents expected from their technologies were sort of merging in an interesting way. It certainly didn't happen linearly. My first investment and partner is a company called Payit. They're a big player in the space now in payments, but the original idea was a mobile app that allowed you to conduct transactions with the DMV from your couch, the way you would order an Amazon package, which made a ton of sense. And we spent about 3 years explaining how a mobile app was different than accessing a state website on your phone. And there was just all of this learning that came from that of only having technologies that really were serving or solving a problem that governments knew they had or were being encouraged to solve. And so I have just found this niche of loving to help them solve the problems they know they need to solve. What's people intensive, what's process intensive, what's being done manually, what's being done on paper. How can we offer technology as a public-private partnership? And how can we really sort of smooth the edges of both the internal processes for government stakeholders, but the external experience with government to sort of increase trust and visibility and service delivery. So I'm hooked, maybe like you are, but despite its foibles.
Well, you talk a bit about some of the changes that you've made and witnessed on the cloud adoption front. So, there's that side of change, but what would you point to that you'd say is still stuck in government?
I think that there's this opportunity right now for government to really get their arms around their data in a way that historically hasn't been possible. And so when you ask what's stuck is the fact that so much of their historical data is still in filing cabinets or on the computers of people who have retired or in software forms that are no longer relevant or don't speak to existing platforms. And I think that is going to make it really, really hard to sort of embrace this next generation of innovation and the speed that comes with it and the ability to see across a lot of different sectors and departments and silos. So I think we're a little bit stuck right now. I don't think that will be forever, but in the form that state and local governments have their data, how they're using it or not, if they know where it is or not, and how do you sort of prepare them and work with them to prepare for this next generation of possibility.
So, I've had on the podcast people that primarily from the public sector sides, whether it's mayor, or CIO, or other kind of leadership roles. And usually I've asked them kind of how do they see and what advice they give to the private sector that's interacting. But your perspective is really interesting. I think the GovTech investment side is not as wide as it is in the enterprise SaaS private sector world. What advice would you give founders that are starting now and looking at GovTech as kind of an opportunity to enter?
There's a couple of things that I look for and I've just seen be really successful. One of which is a lot of this is still human to human sales. This is not B2B SaaS. This is government officials working with and buying from people they know and they trust to not, screw them over and not make them look bad and not make these systems even more complicated than they already are. And so there's just a certain likability, I think, required from successful GovTech CEOs to have the patience and speak the language and have the personality to basically do founder-led sales, at least up front. And so if you're super data oriented or you really hate people, I would say GovTech is not for you. And or find a co-founder for whom going out every, conference, regional grouping of cities, city managers and mayors and all of the things that require in-person attendance is exciting too. So that's one sort of big factor that I see with successful CEOs. The other is I sort of alluded to with the mobile app versus accessing the state website on your phone. Governments have so much going on. There are so many pulls on their time. There are so few resources to really deliver at the quality and the speed that, of course, they want to deliver to. And I think that one of the risks is that we as constituents or as founders can really clearly identify problems that are happening in government, right? No one is fully happy with government services, regardless of party, regardless of what that is, but there's just always something kind of inconvenient about it. And I have seen a lot of founders identify the inconvenience and build a solution for it. But the reality is government may or may not want to solve for that.
I concur, which is why I'm nodding my head. I mean, I think on that topic, what I see a lot is they find something that needs to be solved, and government is full of it. We all know that. But they're forgetting sometimes, and I say forgetting like I didn't experience this firsthand running straight into this mistake or this challenge, we'll call it, which is there's existing legacy system solutions that even if you have a solution that's better, in the private sector, it's a no-brainer. Better solutions, usually in the free market, will win. Yeah. In government, the entrenchment of legacy systems can mean that even if you have a system that's 30, 40% better, you will still have a hard time ripping out the existing incumbent, and it'll take you years. And that's something that I didn't appreciate the enormity of the challenge until we really started kind of digging in my last company in Waycare, coming into it now with Darwin and much more clear-eyed and open about that challenge.
I think that that's absolutely right. And how much sort of proactivity is required in building those relationships so that when those contracts are up, they're thinking of you. And that's a tremendous resource allocation for a startup, right? To figure out which markets are most ripe, which ones are most unhappy, and then do nothing but try to sell into them over a period of time so that in 1, 3, 5 years, when the contract is up, you're the one they're writing the contract for. That's really hard. And in some ways, I've seen people get around that in a couple of ways. One, coming in below procurement levels, right? So they can pilot you or try you on while they also have this system of record. And then I'm seeing cities innovate a lot faster. The I the upside of cities is that I think that they are more innovative. They can make faster decisions. They're trying on a lot of different hats. The downside is I actually think things are a little bit less sticky. State
Hmm.
level systems, super sticky, super entrenched, much bigger contracts, much sort of longer contracts. Cities I'm seeing kind of flit through solutions. And I actually think that that's really good for the industry because the ones that are sticky are the ones that are actually providing value. But it can make it a little bit harder, at least from an investment perspective, to judge the success of a company based on the stickiness of their contracts, which has always sort of been what's appealing about GovTech.
Speaking of judging the success of an idea or a solution, um, I think the hot topic today, when you talk about technology solutions in government, is around AI. That's true for the rest of this other sectors as well. So, within that environment specifically, talking around Gen AI, where are you seeing that from your investor hat showing up in early stage startups focused on the GovTech right now? And what are the ones you're most excited about? Not specific companies, though I'm happy if you want to give them a shout out, happy to do that here too, but more, what are those kind of themes where you see AI really playing a critical role in having a market opportunity, and perhaps where there's potential areas that are more hyped rather than the promise that's currently being touted?
Yeah. So I think on the founder and sort of operator side, AI is providing a really interesting sales challenge because on one hand, every city and state is looking sort of for AI solutions. They're hearing about it, they're afraid of being left behind. And on the other hand, there's this super fragmented, kind of unknown regulatory horizon around AI. And so I think that there's a little bit of a hesitancy to buy an AI first solution, although they are interested in buying solutions that have AI as part of them. So there's this sort of it's a distinction without much of a difference. But I do find, in terms of effective sales and partnerships, the companies that are talking about the output of their software and just mentioning that AI is part of it are having a bit easier time than companies that are leading with an AI first solution. I would say the other challenge for builders and operators who are starting to sell AI solutions to government is who are you building for? Meaning, we talked about the fragmented landscape. Do you have to build your software to the highest level of potential regulation? Or can you sort of build a software that anyone can use? And then when things are regulated, you can adjust. I just had a conversation with one of the companies I advise right now, My Town AI. They're great. They're creating a digital twin for small towns, which is a customer segment that is very hard to access. But the founder is this mayor pro tem, and she has this unbelievable relationship network, and she has just unique access to a customer set and an understanding of the customer needs. And we had a conversation last week, and which was like, do you think that AI is going to be able to be FOIAble, Freedom of Information Act requestable? Are states or cities going to have to basically explain and be able to audit everything that has been generated using AI, whether it's in a FOIA request or whether it's in a press release? And how do you build a company with that in mind? And should you build a company with that in mind? Because that's obviously a little bit more complex developmentally. So um, think those are conversations that are happening right now without really clear answers, although my instinct says that companies should be building to the sort of highest threshold of regulation, even though it's a little bit more complex, because there's a chance that there's less regulation in other places, but there's going to rarely be like more regulation. And you want to keep that customer set as a possibility.
You mentioned a few things here. So I think the topic, when you brought up FOIA, so for our listeners that, I don't know, aren't in GovTech, Freedom of Information Act, government's unique, again, in the sense that everything you do, you can request as a citizen access to that information. And it's a really good point because everything they do right now is FOIA-able, or public records disclosure. And already we had a case in the UK where this has happened. They requested a FOIA for one of the documents that was created with ChatGPT, and the UK government gave it to them. So I think it's coming. What's interesting is it's also impacting decisions in the government. So, for example, take something really simple like note takers. I love note takers on meetings. It's great. I don't have to kind of jot down the notes anymore. AI does a really good job with it. In government, that is a hot topic, and you'll get two sides of the coin there. Some are for it, others will use FOIA as a reason why not to have it. So if you have note takers in the meeting, everything that happened in there is now transferable, right? And so everything you say across any meeting across your day that has note takers can now be FOIA'd or public record disclosure. So there's hesitancy to jump in. And it raises a whole new question when everything is going to be transcribed. And that, that kind of statement brings me to the question you're talking about some of the challenges around the regulation. You need to build a higher standard. As these companies are thinking about product market fit, how do they go about measuring that and really providing a testament to themselves whether they're seeing signals of that versus kind of one-off and customizing to that customer? And how do you see that, different than, if you will, the private sector?
Yeah, I got into a discussion a few weeks ago with a founder who said to me, every GovTech company is an enterprise software company. And I sort of took issue with that because I think at its core, SaaS GovTech is about keeping your customers happy, like enterprise, like regular SaaS, but there is this ability to sort of plug and play at scale.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I thought about it, the truer that felt, which is that every government buyer, in my experience, needs a fair amount of handholding, which is great. And the customer experience is so much more important because governments talk. And unlike sort of B2B SaaS, where there's this desire to gatekeep innovation and gatekeep technologies that are effective, that is not the case in government. And mayors are
Mm-hmm.
talking, managers are talking, governors are talking. And so this desire to sort of be able to pull on levers to make your customers extra happy ends up being sort of make or break in GovTech. And so as companies explore product market fit, one of the first, what you were asking, like what do you look for in company? One of the first questions I ask on calls is how companies are thinking about their ideal customer profile, even if they only have 2 or 3 pilots going. And what I'm trying to get to with that is not just we think it's, small cities. What I'm trying to get to is a layer deeper of how do you think about sort of the geography, the economics, the buying cycle, the buyer itself, the problem set, so that you can force rank certain markets over others. Because one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest challenges in GovTech, to your point, is finding that early product market fit and really staying loyal to it. Because there's a lot of shiny objects. A lot of these technologies can be applied across different segments, across different buyers, especially if it's sort of relatively horizontal, which I think is a very effective way of building. You're going to have a lot of people wanting to buy your software. And the more devoted you are to sort of your ideal customer segment, even early, understanding that that will be a little bit adaptable will save so much time and so many resources going after every shiny object. So I think that there is an exercise that I often do with the companies I work with, which is like, how do we think about 5 or 6 factors and who we think is going to be most inclined to buy you? Are they in trouble on something? Do they have lead pipes? Do they have an expanding city outside of the traditional boundaries, so they're having a hard time doing service delivery? Do they have changing demographics within the city that have different needs? Are they receiving funding for XYZ? So I think that the exercise for AI enabled startups and other startups selling into GovTech is the same, which is like, how do you really identify your customer early and force rank early conversations to get to a yes?
So, I mean, that is definitely true, I think, at the early stage, and something that's a challenge. Obviously, governments love pilots. And so you end up, a lot of times you'll see startups that are in pilot mode, right, with 10, 15 different customers. And even when it goes well, one of the questions I often ask startups that I kind of work with or help is around, what is your approach to scaling? One of the hardest things I think in government is actually that moment of scaling, because you can find there's many problems in government. If you build a good solution, you're going to find buyers. If, to your point, you know how to sell and connect to people. But then you get to the challenge of, okay, you have 1, 2 million, $3 million in ARR. Now you need to be a Series B, Series C company going to 10, 20, $50 million. And that's a whole different ballgame from a budget procurement perspective. So what have you seen work there, and where have you seen some companies struggle?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point because the strategy needs to become cleaner as they scale, meaning at the beginning, you do want to say yes to everything to a certain extent, but revenue and sustainability are the main goals. And they are always sort of the goals, but I think that there's this ability once you reach a certain scale to choose almost to like double down on your ICP in a new way. So, one company I worked with, they were growing significantly. They had relatively low average contract value, but they had tons of customers. They were very sector specific to their type of customer. They were selling a product that was very cheap as compared to their competitors, and they were getting thousands and thousands of logos. And when I was working with them through their Series A raise, they had a venture capital firm come in and say, you need to pick now. Is the goal to go after logos, or is the goal to increase contract value? Because those are different customers, those are different sales cycles. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they have different amounts of value. I think you can get to the same horizon, but you can't do both at once. You're picking a strategy early in that you're trying to find the customer that wants to buy you, but then there's the secondary exercise as you grow of really determining what kind of business you want to be. And that can be a very hard exercise because you want to continue to say yes to everyone, but the reality is the most valuable companies pick one. They're either going for growth and for scale, or they're going for value and contracts.
Yeah, yeah. And so I want to shift gears a bit. We talked about obviously a lot of the startups now are in the generative AI space and trying to build in that realm. I think everyone is across the market. Um, and that raises a big question around risk, both cyber, policy. That again, in government, you spoke a bit about it as it relates to FOIA, but it's not just for public records disclosure. It's for everything from cyber to user behavior. Um, Puts immense amount of risk and exposure for government agencies, and for them, that is a paramount kind of starting point, right, for adoption. So I'm curious to get your take on how do you see the ecosystem right now as it relates to thinking about the policy landscape around AI, where it's progressing, and where are some of the gaps right now that you see risks, and what there's two sides to this coin. So one, how should cities be thinking about it? And then the other side is how should the companies that are selling to these entities attack that and kind of build the right products for that?
Yeah, I read this great article. Actually, Ben Miller from GovTech Magazine wrote it last week, and he highlighted three things that I think are a really good sort of catch-all for how cities and states should be buying AI. And he outlined these like three factors. It was transparency, explainability, and auditability, and they all are sort of the same thing to a certain extent. But this idea that government more than ever needs to be clear on what tools it's using, when and for what and why. And I it's so interesting because AI has this unbelievable ability to help governments think creatively. I think often government buyers are thinking about it as replacing either people or systems that are involved in the extensive amount of bureaucracy and busy work involved in the day-to-day of government. And it can do that. But really, AI's power is its ability to help us think differently and almost in conversation with what we're hoping to achieve. And so when I'm talking to government leaders who say, I want AI to replace FOIA, I say that's great, but are you also using it to ask you questions about sort of large plans for the city? How can we, plan more resilient urban environments? How can we deliver services in a novel way? Because in conversation, it really helps augment what we're already trying to achieve.
Usually, again, when I'm speaking to folks that are from within the public sector working in government roles, I have to be careful jumping into politics. Now, I'll be careful on this too, but What I would like to take advantage of your perspective and perhaps ability to say more on is how do you think, what has been the impact of the shift, which is clear between the last administration around AI and the strategy to deploy it to this new administration and the approach that they're taking?
Under the Biden administration, there was a focus on how do you equip the five people departments with one person in it that can't recruit for those other roles, and how do we give them the ability to continue to administer services at scale, and how do we continue to allow certain vulnerable populations to access more services than they otherwise would. What does it look like to put your insights in and be able to see all the programs you're qualified for and allow those programs to be delivered in multiple languages and at multiple timelines? I think AI can do all that. I think the new administration is sort of the other end of the barbell, which is how do you think about 5-person departments that maybe could be one person with great programming and reallocating those resources across a lot of other departments where they're perhaps more needed. And so it's maybe less about sort of service delivery at scale and more about how do you keep these programs running, but with fewer human touches in it and lower fraud and at in a lean way that doesn't over deliver services to people who don't need them. So it's sort of the same technology at its core, if we're all being honest with each other. But I think it's different applications and different metrics of success that are being used between administrations.
I think I would agree with that kind of assessment at the core. I think what's also fascinating is we're seeing now, again, without wading into the politics, this kind of movement around Doge efficiency, go local at the kind of state level. And every state is kind of putting their own committee around that. And so it's fascinating to see how that started as kind of a federal push, now going local, and what will come from that in terms of some of the action items. But I want to step out from the present and to finish kind of looking into the future, because we are talking about how AI will transform the future, startups that are building what will be the next generation, hopefully, of digital services for the public sector. So what, if you look kind of 5-10 years from now, where do you imagine, AI transforming government? Where do you think it won't succeed? Paint to me a picture of how you see kind of 10 years from now AI's role in the public sector.
I think there is an unbelievable opportunity for government to be proactive and predictive in a way that it is not enabled to do right now. And part of that is just the data sets, as we talked about earlier, being in filing cabinets. And part of that is a need to be so focused on day-to-day service delivery that there's no time or resources to really be thinking on the horizon. But I think, especially to your point about sort of government moving more local and services moving more local or on state and local level, I think there will be a pressure for states and cities to be preemptive in how they think about government. Federal government is doing that to a certain extent. There's SBIR and STTR programs. DoD is great about saying, like, how do we stay globally competitive and resilient and protected? And that sort of hasn't trickled down into state and local markets yet. And I think it needs to. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that pressure testing happen with things like FEMA being disbanded and emergency management and preparedness being pushed down to a state and local level. And I think there will need to be a buying cycle or buying cycles over the next 5 years that allow government to basically play with possibilities and make better decisions now to prevent those possibilities in a way that they're not really doing now. And we're seeing it with the large, amount of natural disasters and cybersecurity risks and schools being hacked. And so, like, how can you use AI to play out all of these scenarios and backwards plan into cities and states that are protected and secure and good to their constituents and delivering services in a way that people can access and appreciate?
Well, Rachel, I want to thank you. If it wasn't clear, if you're a startup that's building in the GovTech space, why you should go to GovTech kind of get an expert in GovTech. I'll say from firsthand experience, very few investors actually understand the public sector from within. Can't tell you how important it is. So your perspective from that investment side is unique. I think will be very helpful to some of the listeners here that are thinking to themselves of taking this immense challenge of stepping into the GovTech space. So
water's warm. Come on in.
Yeah, great having you, and thank you so much. That's it for this episode of the GovAI Podcast. AI is reshaping governance in real time, and as we've seen, the path forward is filled with both promise and complexity. But conversations like this, open, challenging, forward-thinking, are how we shape a smarter, more responsible future. The GovAI Podcast is produced by Poldu. Our editor is Noam Maital, with production assistance from Shani Roth and Shakel Dror. We'll be back in 2 weeks to tackle more challenges and explore creative solutions at the intersection of AI and the public sector. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and never forget that even the sharpest tools mean nothing without the hand that wields them.